In today's episode, I'm sharing with you 20 fun Dollar Tree spring and Easter DIYs. This is a long compilation video, so grab your favorite beverage. For those of you that don't want to watch the entire video, I have broken this down into 4 categories with timestamps so that you will be able to find the projects that you are interested in. And I hope you enjoy. For our first project, we're going to be using one of Dollar Tree's 3.5-inch terracotta pots, and we'll give that 1 coat of black chalk paint. I also made sure to paint the top rim as well as inside the pot a little bit. Grab a bowl. Any bowl will do. I'm using a Dollar Tree bowl. This has a print on one side, and it measures about 5.5 inches across the top. I'm going to give this 2 coats of crimson chalk paint. This is made by Waverly. It is going to give you the most beautiful deep red color. Once that dries, we're going to take one of Dollar Tree's small sponge brushes and dab that into some black chalk paint and make sure that we have it evenly spread across the sponge. We're going to draw a line in the center of the bottom of our bowl. Then we'll bring that line down on one side, turn it around, and bring the line down again on the opposite side. So you'll have one continuous line that runs from one side of the bottom of the bowl to the other side. Using a larger Dollar Tree sponge applicator, we're going to dab that into the black chalk paint and create a semicircle at the bottom of one of those lines on one side. Now you can make this as big or as small as you like. Then we're going to take that same sponge brush applicator, dip that into our paint, and hold it in place to create the perfect circles on the outside of the bowl. I'm going to add a couple of those on each side of the line, and then we'll take the smaller sponge brush to create some smaller circles throughout on each side. So you can add as many dots as you like to create this beautiful ladybug. Make sure you allow that to thoroughly dry. This is how mine is looking. Then we're going to take the end of a wooden dowel, the flat end, dip that into our white paint, and then create 2 small white circles for the eyes. You can also use the end of a paintbrush for this. Once you have allowed all of the paint to dry, we're going to seal everything in with some Mod Podge. This is going to protect that chalk paint from the weather and being outdoors. I'm using a matte Mod Podge. If you would like a shinier look, you could use a gloss Mod Podge. Just try to make sure you keep your brush strokes minimal so it'll have a beautiful finish. I allowed that to dry overnight, and then you can add in your favorite plant or flower, and this will give your garden or patio area a beautiful pop of color. For this project, you'll need one of Dollar Tree's glass bud vases. This one measures 2.56 inches by 9.17 inches, and that's the barcode if you need it. Once you remove the label, go ahead and give it a really good cleaning to make sure it is free of any dust or debris. Also make sure that it is thoroughly dry. We're going to be using one of Dollar Tree's scalloped plastic bowls. You can find this in their party section. Make sure to give it a thorough cleaning and dry as well. You'll need a disposable bowl, some Mod Podge, just depending on what sheen you want. I'm using a matte, and you'll need some food coloring. Pick the color of your choice, and depending on how dark you want your piece to be, will be how much food coloring you add. I want mine to have a darker tint, so I added a very generous amount of the blue food coloring, and I'm also using some disposable gloves just to make sure I don't get that food coloring on my skin. Blend it very thoroughly together, and then I'm applying this to the outside of the glass vase. You could apply this to the inside. However, sometimes Mod Podge will clump up, so I chose to do this on the outside so it would be easier for me to remove those clumps and then go over it with the brush again. If you choose to do it on the inside, you would want to make yours a little bit thinner, so you'll be able to pour that on the inside and then pour the Mod Podge out and let it drain. I set that to the side and I'm going to let it dry, and I'm applying a coat to the inside of that plastic bowl. Once that's finished, I will set it to the side and let it dry, and depending on how dark you want it to be as to how many coats you'll need to add. I took the remaining Mod Podge that's in my disposable bowl and put that in the refrigerator so that it wouldn't dry out. This is how it looks after the first coat has completely dried, and see that Mod Podge did not dry out by placing it in the refrigerator. I made sure to blend it very thoroughly to make sure that the coloring is consistent, and instead of applying it with the brush for the second coat, I'm going to apply it with a sponge dabber. Now this will give you a few air bubbles once it dries, but I kind of like the way that looks. I like the texture of it. So I'm going to apply a very thick layer over this entire vase and set that to the side. I let mine dry for maybe 4 hours. I wanted to make sure it was completely dry. And I'm going to do the exact same thing to the inside of that plastic bowl. But if you don't want to have any air bubbles in yours, you may want to add that second coat with the paintbrush. This is a closer look at how those air bubbles look, but I am perfectly fine with that. Now there are two different ways that you can do this. We are actually making a mushroom. So you could take a permanent glue like E6000 or super glue and apply that to the top rim of your vase, and then set your bowl upside down, and you can use this in your garden or on your patio or in your walkway. Or you could take some Dollar Tree fairy lights, and I'm going to apply this to the inside of the vase just by wrapping it around my finger so it'll kind of curl up. You can place that in there, and the wire's pretty thin so you can bend it over, then add your glue to the rim, place your bowl on top, and you have a gorgeous mushroom lamp for your covered porch or patio. We're using one of Dollar Tree's garden dishes, as well as 2 of the plastic scalloped bowls. You can also find these at Family Dollar in a pack of 4 for $1 versus Dollar Tree's pack of 4 for $1.25. Once I remove all of the stickers, I'm going to wipe any kind of glue excess off, and then I'm going to give the largest garden dish 2 coats of Waverly's chalk paint in the color Crimson on the bottom side of the garden dish. Allow that to dry, and for the smaller ones, one of those I'm going to give 2 coats of Waverly's chalk paint in the color Peacock, which turns out to be a beautiful blue. And the second one, I am going to take some white chalk paint, and then I'm going to mix some Folk Arts Daybreak Yellow in that. I wasn't sure how well the acrylic paint was going to adhere to the plastic, so I decided to add some white chalk paint in. Now I added a little bit too much white. It was a little too pale, so I do end up going over top of that with just the Daybreak Yellow acrylic paint, and it gave it that perfect pop of yellow color. Once all of your paint has dried, we're going to take some white chalk paint as well as 3 different sizes of Dollar Tree's Pouncer sponge brushes. I'm going to take the largest one, which is the blue one, dab it into my white chalk paint and kind of get that even around the end of the sponge. Then you can apply it directly to the garden dish, kind of push it around to give it even pressure on all sides, and then lift it straight up. If it doesn't come out in a perfect circle, you can just go right back over it and kind of blend that in to get the perfect circle that you're looking for. Now you can add as many circles on here as you like. Once I get those on there, I'm going to set that one to the side and let it dry. And I'm going to take the purple pouncer's brush or sponge and use that size for the blue and yellow bowl. Now this one does have some indentions in it, so it takes a little bit more time to get those perfect circles on there. You just kind of have to push it around and kind of get the paint down inside of those indentions. But I loved using these bowls because of those scalloped edges. These are just going to make the perfect mushrooms for our garden. Now, once you have all of the circles on there that you like, depending on how many you want to add on there, I'm going to go back and then take the green pouncer sponge, and I can add some smaller circles in between some of those larger circles to give it a different variation of sizes. And then I'll take the purple sponge, which was the one we originally added on the blue and yellow, and I can use that size to add smaller circles on top of the red mushroom. Again, you can just play around with this and add as many circles or as less amount of circles as you like. Now you want to make sure that these thoroughly dry before you put anything else on it, any kind of sealant. So while those are drying, I'm going to take 2 of Dollar Tree's terracotta pots as well as a plastic tumbler that I found at Walmart for 50 cents. Now the terracotta pots measure 3.5 inches across the top and 3.5 inches tall. The tumbler is also 3.5 inches across the top. It's about 6 3/4 of an inch tall. I'm going to give these a coat of white chalk paint. Now the terracotta pots, I only needed to apply 1 coat, but the tumbler, I did have to apply 2 coats. Again, make sure everything is dry, and because we're going to be setting these outside and it's going to expose our paint to the elements, I'm going to give this a coat of Mod Podge. Now, I'm adding a gloss Mod Podge because I want that sheen, I want it to look shiny, and I want to be able to easily wipe this off. So I'm going to add this in a circular motion because as the Mod Podge dries, you will be able to see some of those brush strokes. So I'm going to apply that to all of our plastic bowls as well as the plastic cup and the terracotta pots. So you just want to get a nice good seal on everything. And then I let mine dry for 24 hours before I attached each of the pieces together. And as you can see here, once everything dries, it just has a beautiful glossy sheen to it. Now I'm going to attach mine using E6000. For the larger garden dish, I want to attach the bottom of the cup to the inside center of the garden dish. So I'm applying my E6000 and leaving a few little spaces so that I can add some hot glue for that temporary hold to give it time for that E6000 to set up. When I apply the cup in there, I am going to push down, make sure all that E6000 kind of gets spread out right there in the center, and then let that cure for about 24 hours. I did the same thing for the terracotta pots, except I'm going to apply the glue to the rim of the terracotta pot because I liked the design at the bottom looking better, sticking out from under those plastic bowls. Now I let mine set for 24 hours before I put them outside, but it should only take a few hours for the glue to dry. Now, once you have all of this together, these turned out so beautiful. I love these pops of color. I just adore how this project turned out. And when I place them in my garden and I walk across the yard, it just provides this beautiful color. I just love it. It just makes my eyes happy, and I hope you guys like this project too. Grab one of Dollar Tree's metal buckets with the rope on one end. This one measures about 7.5 inches tall. Carefully paint right above the rope with some white chalk paint, and then paint the entire outside of the bucket, including the very bottom. This will take 2 coats of white chalk paint and allow that to dry. Then take a Dollar Tree dowel, mark it to 1 inch. Then I'm using my handheld miter shears to cut these down. I have that listed in my Amazon store in my description box below if you're interested. Cut 4 of those and then sand each of the ends flat. Then I'm going to apply these to the back side of a piece of painter's tape to the sticky side. Then I'm going to tape that down to my surface so that I can easily paint these with some black chalk paint, including the very ends. Once that dries, I'll roll them over and paint the other side. Now flip your bucket upside down and mark the center at the bottom of the bucket, and then evenly mark 4 spaces of the very rim. We're going to hot glue those dowels at each of those spaces. Now I do recommend using some E6000. I'm just using hot glue for video purposes. Then we're going to take some twine and glue this not at the very top but almost at the top on one of the dowels. Pull that to the next one and then loop it around that dowel. And once you have that looped, you'll add a little bit of hot glue to hold that loop in place. Then once that sets, you'll continue to do that around each of the dowels until you get to the very beginning where you started. And it should be looking something like this. Then we're going to take a piece of painter's tape and cover up the rope at the bottom so we don't get any paint on that, and take one of Dollar Tree's large sponge brush applicators. And we're going to pull that straight down after we dip it into some black chalk paint. Then we'll go to the other side and kind of curve it to the left, and then the other side curve it to the right. This is going to give you a perfect arch at the top. Then you can fill in the rest with a fine paintbrush. Then make sure to turn it over and get right there at the line where the rope is. Then I'm going to take a smaller sponge brush and go around the very rim, which is now going to be the top part of our lighthouse. And you'll want to take some Mod Podge and apply over this to seal all of that paint in to protect it. Then take one of Dollar Tree's solar lights, remove the stake, and then I'm using my hand saw and miter box to cut this down to 1.5 inches. Then I'm going to run that over some sandpaper to smooth that cut in, so make sure it's nice and flat. Then we can reattach it to our solar light. And again, I'm showing you hot glue, but you'll want to use some permanent glue to glue this right to the center at the top of your lighthouse. And this is going to give you some height right above those dowels. This is such a beautiful piece, and it is even more beautiful at nighttime. I have 2 wooden rolling pins. Now you can find these at thrift stores. You can find them at Dollar General, Walmart for just maybe $4 or $5. I happen to already have 2, and I thought it would be really fun to make something decorative out of this. Now you're not going to be able to use it in your baking once you do this, but because we're using removable wallpaper, you can take it off later on if you decide to use them. This is just going to be for decorative purposes. You could paint the handles to match your wallpaper if you like, but I want to keep this natural wood look, and I also want to have about 1/4 inch of the rolling pin showing on each side. So I'm going to measure my rolling pin and then take a 1/2 inch off of that measurement so I can make my marks and cut this out. Of course, I also need to know exactly how long it needs to be, and then you'll have almost a 1/2 sheet left over to create something else, or you could do 2 rolling pins with 1 piece of the wallpaper. So I'm going to peel that backing off and then just set my rolling pin on top of it once I kind of line it up, and then just make sure that end adheres well. And then as you're pulling the backing off, you just roll your rolling pin straight over top of it and smooth any kind of wrinkles out. This literally took less than 5 minutes. This is so pretty. You could embellish it with some twine or whatever you like. I'm going to use use the other rolling pin with this wallpaper because I thought it kind of matched a little bit with the blues, but you could decorate this in so many different ways. These are absolutely gorgeous, and like I said, take less than 5 minutes to make. For this project, we're using a battery-operated candle. I do not recommend using a real candle for this since this is paper we're using. I'm going to use some of that leftover wallpaper from our first project, which is absolutely gorgeous. We're just going to line the bottom of the candle up to it and then make a mark at the top so that we can mark that out and cut it down to size. We're going to do this one just like we did with the rolling pin and start by peeling the backing off. Set your candle down, make sure your pattern's going the right way, line the top and bottom up, and then peel your backing off, gently roll it around and push any kind of air bubbles or wrinkles out. This project is so easy and it turns out so gorgeous. Trim your excess off, and because this is removable wallpaper, I'm going to put a piece of Scotch tape right on the seam and just to make sure it stays in place. For our next project, we're using a Dollar Tree cake pan. I'm going to take a fine grit sandpaper and go over all of the places that I want to paint, just to scuff that up and help my paint adhere better. We're also going to be using one of Dollar Tree's faux shiplap signs. They come in a couple of different colors. I think they had white, brown, and black. We're going to flip that over and then set our cake pan on top of that a little bit less than half from the bottom. Then trace that bottom portion out with a pencil. Set this on a cutting board, and using a utility knife or a box blade, you'll want to carefully go around your marks that you traced out and just make that indentation. You'll do this maybe 5 or 6 times. You can actually cut all the way through this board, but I was a little bit impatient and decided I was going to try to break mine off. But when I did break some pieces in the front. So I thought, okay, I'll just go ahead and clean it up, and I'll use the back side of it and paint it. So after I trimmed the rest of that off, I used my sandpaper and I sanded around the edges to get it nice and smooth. As I was doing that, I decided to go ahead and sand the front. And I really liked the way it was looking. I like that rustic distressed look, and I think I will be able to use the front of this sign, so that was a happy little accident. Now it's time to paint our cake pan, and I want mine to have a galvanized look, so I'm using a brushed silver paint, a white paint, as well as a black paint, and a chip brush. I'm going to start off with this silver paint, and you just want to dab the ends of your chip brush in there and then kind of wipe some of it off, and then just pounce this up and down on all of the areas that you want to be painted. I'm not going to be painting the bottom portion of this because that is where we're going to put our wood, but I am going to paint the inside, the rims, as well as the outside rim, just because you can see all of those areas. Once you have your silver paint on there to your desired color, let that dry. Then you'll come back with your black paint and use the same chip brush and do the exact same thing, just pouncing it up and down. And if you get it a little too dark, you can always kind of dip it back into that silver and blend it out just a little bit more. Again, you're going to let that dry, and then you'll come back with your white paint and do the exact same thing. So once I had all of that covered, if there are some areas that were a little bit too dark, I would kind of mix some of the 3 colors together and dab that in those areas. Again, I did that on the outside rim as well. And the key thing is to make sure that each layer of paint or color that you're adding, you let it dry in between before you go to your next color. Just keep doing that until you achieve the look that you want. And this is how mine's turning out. Once that paint dries, we're going to add that board to the front of our cake pan, and I'm going to do that using a permanent glue. Here I'm using E6000, and I'm also going to add a little bit of hot glue for that temporary hold. Line it up with the bottom of your cake pan, and this is turning out so cute. Now I want a hanger for mine, so I'm going to use some nautical rope from Dollar Tree. I always like to glue the end together to keep it from straying. And then I'm going to flip that cake pan over, and right where the wood is on the outside, that's where I'm going to line my nautical rope up and glue that to the backside rim of the cake pan. Now I want the top to be a little bit more narrow, so I am going to add a little bit more glue, hold that nautical rope in place. I'll be putting some artificial flowers in mine, so I'm going to use this floral foam from Dollar Tree. It comes in a pack of 2 and they're 4.8 inches. I'm going to cut that in half. You want something thin enough to fit down in your cake pan. And the 2 pieces won't fit, but 1 piece will. So I'm just going to glue that to the back side of the board. So it's going to be looking kind of like this. And then to fill mine in, I'm going to use some greenery. This is from Hobby Lobby. And I'm going to bend that over so that it will just flow in the very front of that board. And then I'm going to add about 3 of those sprigs in there off to one side. And I'm using some succulents that came from Dollar Tree. And also one of these little greenery pieces that came from Dollar Tree. It came in a little container. I just kind of pulled that out. You could hang this up inside or even hang it up on a covered porch. This project, you'll want to use a napkin that has a print on the entire napkin. This one came from Hobby Lobby. Go ahead and remove that back layer and put this on a heat protective mat. Since we are using the entire napkin, we're going to iron out those creases. I have this set on 365. You only have to go over each of those creases one time and it's going to smooth it out nice and perfect. Then we're going to take one of Dollar Tree's small glass plates. Make sure it's thoroughly clean and thoroughly dry. We're going to be applying the napkin to the back side of the plate. So put a nice even layer of Mod Podge on the entire back side, spreading it all the way to the edges. If you have a lot of excess, make sure you get that off first. Then put your napkin print side down and then gently press the napkin to the back side of the plate, making sure you go all the way to the edges. I did find it was a lot easier to set this on top of a paint bottle, and then we're going to add a layer of Mod Podge to the back side of the napkin, again all the way to the edges. Just add a thin layer and don't worry about those wrinkles because we're going to do something really pretty with that towards the end of the project. Now once you've allowed your Mod Podge to completely dry, take a fine grit sandpaper and go around the entire plate, removing that excess napkin. Again, set it on top of a bottle of paint to make it easier to work with, because I'm going to paint the back side of this with 2 coats of a chalk paint in the color French Linen. You could skip this part, but I thought it would be really pretty to add this soft color on the back and bring out the texture of the wrinkles on the napkin on the back of this plate. So I added 1 coat, let that dry, and added the second coat and let it dry. Look at that gorgeous texture. It looks like a real piece of pottery. And when you flip it over, oh my goodness, that is gorgeous. Since we didn't do anything to the front of the plate, it is food safe, but I do recommend that it is hand wash only. We're using another 10-inch beaded wreath form from Dollar Tree. You don't necessarily have to have the wreath form. I just wanted some of the beads, so you could use some loose beads. I'm going to use 11 of those. Using some wood glue and a square, I'm going to apply some glue to the sides of the beads so that the holes are at the top and the bottom. And I'm going to glue all 11 of these together. And I'm just using that square to keep this in a straight line. Then you allow your glue to set up so that it is tacky enough that it will stay in a straight line. We're also going to use one of Dollar Tree's bamboo rings. We're going to use the larger one. It's the 7.8-inch one. And then once that's tacky enough, you can remove your square, add some wood glue to the outside beads. And then we're going to set that bamboo ring directly over it and then kind of slide our bamboo ring up so it touches the sides. Now it's not going to stay there, so I am going to use some burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree and hot glue this to the bamboo ring as well as the beads, tucking it in between each of the beads. This is going to secure them and keep them in a straight line. So you could skip the wood glue part, but I found that it was just easier to use the wood glue so that they'll stay in a straight line as you are attaching your ribbon to the front. So this is how it looks on the back side. I'm going to take another piece of that same ribbon and create a hanger at the top by folding that in half and then tucking the ends through the loop. And instead of tying a knot on the two ends, I'm just going to hot glue those together so it will have one continuous loop at the top. But you could use whatever kind of ribbon you like, so you can get really creative with this. I'm using some Dollar Tree flowers, and I'm going to hot glue that one in the center of the bead, and then I'm going to add some greenery on each side, and each piece I'm hot gluing in. These are just tiny little sprigs that I have cut off of bundles that I already have in my craft room, and I'm going to add some variation of greenery, some lavender, and some white flowers. I'm going to make sure to remove all of those glue strands, and you can leave it just like this so you can have the ribbon on the front or you can show the beads on the back. I went ahead and added that same ribbon to the back just in case I want to hang it up and it can kind of twirl around and you can see all sides. But also I preferred that look better. So you guys let me know what you think of this project. For this spring wreath, I'm using some lamb's ear from Walmart. They come two in a bundle, some spike bush from Dollar Tree, as well as some pink baby's breath from Dollar Tree. I'm going to cut the spike bush and the baby's breath, each of those stems off individually, and then push the leaves up to the top of the flowers. The lamb's ear, I will use one individual bundle for each. So you will need some white or green pipe cleaners. I'm going to cut mine in half, but that's not necessary. You can use a whole one. We're going to start off with one of the lamb's ear, add a spike bush, and one of the baby's breath. Where the three meet at the bottom, take your pipe cleaner and twist that around really tightly, but leave some of the length at the bottom. And we're going to create 6 bundles. So you'll need 3 of the lamb's ear from Walmart, and then you'll have enough off of one bundle of the spike bush and the baby's breath. Then I'm going to cut about 2 inches below the pipe cleaner on all 6 of those bundles, and I'm using a 10-inch beaded wreath form from Dollar Tree, but you can use any wreath form you want. I'm going to take one bundle and kind of bend that around to form the shape of the wreath. Take the pipe cleaner and feed that between 2 of those beads and twist it really tightly in the back. I'll take my next bundle, again bend it to form the shape of the wreath, and attach that using the pipe cleaner. Now, if you wanted to use longer pipe cleaners, because once you get this attached, the top part will be a little floppy, so you'll need to attach that to the wreath form as well. See here, once I get that tightened on there, that will kind of flop up and down. So if you want to leave your pipe cleaners a little bit longer, you can do so and then attach that top piece to the bottom of the first piece. But I like using the smaller pieces because then I can place the pipe cleaner on whichever branch that I want to. I'm not having to place it exactly where the other pipe cleaner was. I'm going to continue to add these bundles until I have all 6 of them on there and the wreath is fully covered. Then I can go around and twist all of my leaves and my florals and make it look nice and full. And this is how it looks on the back, and this is how it looks on the front. And I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I love these colors, but I would love to know what you guys think. For this project, I'm using 2 bundles of pink wildflowers from Dollar Tree, some leftover white flowers that I already had in my craft room. I'm not quite sure where they came from. I'll be using these beautiful pink and white flowers from Dollar General, as well as some white roses from Walmart. I'm going to cut my stems off of the bundles just so that I'll be able to stagger these at different heights. And I'm using a grapevine wreath. If you have a roses department store in your town, you could find one of these very large grapevine wreaths for $5.99. I'm going to start by placing the white flowers at the top on each side, and once I like where they're placed at, I'm going to hot glue those into place. I'm going to do the same thing with the pink flowers, staggering them in different areas on each side, and once I like the placement, I will go back and add some hot glue to make sure that not only the stems stay in the grapevine wreath, but also that they don't flop around. I want to place something really cute in the middle, and that is this beautiful bunny from Dollar Tree. To attach that, I'm going to use some floral wire, and because my floral wire is pretty thin, I'm going to take a long strand of this, fold it in half, twist it together so that it will be a bit more sturdy. Because I want it to sit a little sideways, I am going to place the floral wire at an angle. I'm going to attach that using some hot glue, and the bottom of his feet are styrofoam, so I was able to take a couple of ordinary staples and push that over top of the wire into the feet. And then I also decided to take some ribbon just to make sure that the wire does not come out from under the staples. I'm going to hot glue that over top of the staple and the wire. Once that sets up, I'm going to take my wires and then feed that through the bottom part of the wreath all the way around. I'm going to twist that very tightly, and to make sure that it doesn't wiggle or move around, I'm going to feed one side through some of the grapevine wreath and the other side the same way, and then I will take that piece, tie it together because it's pretty thin, and twist it very tightly. I can cut that excess wire off and make sure to tuck that piece down into the wreath so it doesn't scratch anything. Then I'm going to take some of those beautiful white roses and attach those to the bottom underneath the bunny, as well as some of those pink and white flowers. I'm going to attach that using some hot glue. And then to make a hanger for this, I'm just going to use some burlap ribbon, wrap that around the top, and hot glue one end to the other end. Of course, you could add a bow if you like, but I like just the simplicity of this burlap ribbon. Project, we're using a grapevine bunny wreath form. You can find this at Dollar Tree in their plus section for $5, which I think is an amazing deal. This measures about 25 inches tall. It has a nice hanger on it, and it has the chicken wire in the middle. To decorate mine, I'll be using some white floral bundles from Hobby Lobby. They're just small white flowers. You can get these when they have their 40% off sale, but Dollar Tree also carries white flowers that I think would be perfect for this project. Since mine has 4 stems on the bundle, I'm going to cut each of the stems off of it, and you will need a total of 3 bundles for this. Once I have all of those cut, I'm going to shape each of the stems to the form of the bunny wreath, and I want my flowers to go in an upward direction. I'm going to place the bottom piece underneath one of the wire pieces on the form, but I'm not going to attach that yet. I'm going to start by attaching the top piece to the wreath form using some floral wire. Twist that around real tight around the stem. Cut your excess floral wire off, and then I like to twist mine around and tuck it to make sure it's not going to scratch anything. Before you add your floral wire to the bottom, you can add your next piece so that you'll be able to attach the top of that piece to the bottom of the first piece, and you'll use less floral wire. Then I'm going to attach the other 2 pieces on the other side, again starting at the bottom and letting the flowers flow upwards. For the head of the bunny, I'll do the exact same thing by having 2 stems go from the middle section upwards to the top, and then on the opposite side do the same thing. I am leaving a small space between the 2 round wreath forms because I will be adding a bow to that later on. For the ears, you'll need 2 stems for each of the ears, and again, we're going to have those flowers flowing upwards. I'm using some white ribbon. This came from Walmart. I'm going to cut down about 2 foot, use a piece of twine, leave enough for a tail and create a loop. Create a loop on that side and fold it over, and then pinch it together in the center. Tie that with the twine, double knot that on the back, and then I'll cut that excess twine off. I'm also going to be using some of Dollar Tree's spring berry garland. It has a beautiful white and green, which I thought would match perfectly with this wreath. I'm going to cut a long piece off, twist that around the center of the bow a couple of times. Then I can take each strand and wrap this around the grapevine wreath form, twist that a couple of times in the back. Then I'll bring each end back forward to the front of the bow and around that wreath form. I'm going to twist that a couple of times in the center to have some of those berries in the middle of that bow. Then I can dovetail each of the tails. I'm going to trim the length of the berry garland down to be the same on each side, and then using the end of a paintbrush, twirl that around the paintbrush to give it a nice curl on each side of the bow. This wreath turned out absolutely gorgeous, and I have less than $15 invested in this. For our next project, we're going to measure from the left-hand side and make a mark at 4 inches and do the same thing on the right-hand side. Place a piece of painter's tape on those marks. We're going to paint the center section with 2 coats of a white acrylic paint and then let that dry. Then we're going to remove that tape, but save it because we're going to reuse it. We're going to make a mark at the bottom. We're going to make that 2 inches up, and we'll do the same thing on the other side and place a piece of tape on that 2-inch mark. Then we're going to paint the top and bottom pieces with 2 coats of that white acrylic paint. Let that completely dry before you remove your tape, because then we're going to take some more painter's tape and place that on the white lines so that we'll be able to paint that natural wood area a different color. So you can paint yours the color of your choice. I chose to paint mine with a celery green chalk paint, and this will take 2 coats. While that's drying, we're going to be using one of Dollar Tree's MDF wreath base forms. This one measures about 12 inches. I wanted mine to have a slightly lighter color, so I'm going to give this 2 coats of an acrylic paint in the color khaki and let that dry. Now that the paint is dry on our wood round, we're going to remove all of that painter's tape. Now, the next step is optional. I decided to take one of Dollar Tree's furniture markers, and this is in the color oak, and go over each of those lines just to give it a little bit more dimension. You'll want to let that completely dry. I created another decal. This is using the font Hello Honey from defont.com. And also another decal to put below that. I can't pronounce the name of this font, so I'm going to put it on the screen right here. I'm going to place that on the painted green section, and then we're going to flip it over and make another hanger just like we did in our previous wood rounds by using some hot glue, twine, and some ribbon. Now that our wreath base form is dry, we're going to attach that to the front of our sign, which fits perfectly. We're going to do that using some hot glue. And then I have these really cute wood cutouts that Dollar Tree was selling in the springtime. And I'm going to leave these in the natural wood color because it matches that wreath base form perfectly. And hot glue 1 flower and 2 birds right there at the very top. Each one of Dollar Tree's wood rounds measures about 11 3/4 of an inch, and they are much better quality this year than they were last year because they're a lot thicker. For this one, I'm going to give it 2 coats of a white acrylic paint and let that dry. I'm also using this metal sign from Dollar Tree. I'm going to disassemble it by removing the chain on each side using a small pair of pliers. Now, originally, I did want to use the welcome metal part at the top. I thought that I could pull the metal piece off the back, but it was really on there good. So then I took some tin snips and decided to cut that off. But when I did that, it does leave a piece on the very back, and I'm likely not going to use that because it's going to raise it off of my sign. For the bicycle, I'm going to flip that over and use some of Dollar Tree's button magnets. And because I want to put this on the wire itself behind each of the wheels, I'm going to use some Gorilla Glue so that I can get that on there to sit as flat as possible. Now that the paint is dry, I can go ahead and reattach the twine hanger. And then I'm going to set the bicycle as well as that metal welcome sign onto the sign so that I can figure out the placement, and then using a pencil make a mark where each of the magnets are. So I can place some Gorilla Glue in those areas and glue 2 more magnets. And of course, this is when I realized I am not going to use that metal welcome sign because I did not like the way it looked. So I've created a decal, and just like any decal that you see in today's video, I do have these as free printables on my website. The link to that's in my description box below. A neat little trick I want to share with you guys is if you have some new transfer tape and it is super sticky and you find it hard to get your decal off of it, put that on a microfiber cloth, press it flat, lift it up, and do that about twice. It really does help the decal sticking to your transfer tape, and then also it helps to release it when you put it on the sign. I don't know why, but it just makes it a little less sticky and a little easier to work with. I did place that a little bit lower because I want to add something to the top of this sign, and I'm using 2 pieces of boxwood greenery. There are going to be 2 stems on each side, and I just wrapped that in the center using some twine and double knotted it, and then I'm going to bend that to form the shape of the top of the wood round. Using some 2.5-inch wired burlap ribbon, I'm going to dovetail both of the ends by cutting that at an angle, and then create a very simple bow with 2 tails. Then I can attach that to the center of the greenery using that excess twine. Once I gather the bow in the middle, I can just place that on top of the greenery, pull it as tight as I can, and double knot that on the top. Then I'll take a piece of twine and wrap it around each side. It's going to give it a nice clean twine center of the bow, and then I'll double knot it on the back for some extra security to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Once I cut that excess off, I could go ahead and attach this using a generous amount of hot glue to the top of the sign. And if you're wondering about the magnets, not only will they hold the metal bicycle, but this sign can be interchangeable with any similar size metal sign from Dollar Tree, like this one on this stake. They tend to pop off very easily, and since it's metal, you don't even have to add magnets to it, since it will sit flat on the magnets that are already on the sign. Of course, we did add the magnets to the bicycle because those were wires on the back of the wheels. For this project, I've already removed the hanger. I'm going to give this 2 coats of a white acrylic paint, allowing it to dry in between coats, and I also made sure to paint the outside edges. Now that it's dry, I'm going to take a black Sharpie, and I'm just going to create dashes all the way around the outside edge. It doesn't have to be perfect. I wanted a whimsical outline. Then I can reattach the hanger, and I'm going to set this to the side for just a second so that I can work on this cute wooden bee that I found at Hobby Lobby. They have this in the spring shop, and a lot of times you can find these when they're on sale. I'm going to paint both of the wings with 2 coats of a white acrylic paint, allowing it to dry in between coats, and then using a black acrylic paint, I can paint the base of the bee. And I am going to go ahead and paint the outside edges of everything that I painted black, and this will only take 1 coat. Once I finished painting the face, I decided to dry brush some of that black acrylic paint around the edges of the wings, just so that they would kind of stand out and you would be able to see them better. Once that dries, I'm going to use an acrylic paint in the color Yellow Light to paint the rest of the wooden parts, and this will take 2 coats to get full coverage. Now that that's complete, I'm going to take a wood word cutout. This one says grateful, but you could use kind, thankful, humble, whatever you like. This is one I had on hand. I'm going to use a Dollar Tree sponge dauber and some black acrylic paint to go over the top of this with 1 coat. I want to create a sweet little bow for this, so I have some white ribbon, some black and white polka dot ribbon, and I didn't have any black ribbon the same width, so I do have some black fabric, and I'm going to cut that down to about the same width as the other 2 ribbons. I didn't measure these. I'm just going to cut 2 of those and then cut that in half, and then I could cut the white ribbon the same length, and I'm going to cut 4 pieces of the white, just like I have the 4 pieces of the black. But for the black and white polka dot ribbon, I'm going to cut 5 pieces because I want that to be the star of the show. I'm creating a messy bow, so I'm going to take some twine, lay that out across my table, pull it tight, and then I can start staggering these upside down on top of the twine, going in different directions. Once I have all of the ribbon on there, I'm going to take the twine, pull it as tight as I can in the center, and double knot it. Now, my arthritis was acting up this day, so I could not get it as tight as I wanted to get it in the center, so it would be a nice poofy messy bow. So I had to break out the trusty zip tie, because that always works, and you can really cinch that in the middle and get a really nice tight fit. Then I can cut that excess zip tie off. I'm going to go back and dovetail each of the ends of my bow. Now, I could have dovetailed this beforehand, but I wasn't sure how long I wanted them to be, so I held it up to the sign and went back and trimmed each of these up to be much shorter. To cover up the twine and the zip tie that I had in the center, I'm using a thinner black grosgrain ribbon. I'm going to wrap that around and hot glue it. This is going to give it a nice clean look, and then I can go back and pull each of those individual ribbons and separate them, pulling them in different directions. Now we can assemble the sign. I'm going to place the bee in the middle and the woodward cutout at the bottom. To secure those in place, I'm using some hot glue. Then I attach the bow at the top. And then I wasn't completely satisfied with it yet, so once I had the bow in place, I decided to take a Sharpie marker and just make little dots on the sign off to the side so I could add some of these adorable bumblebees that I found at Dollar Tree. I decided to glue one at the bottom and one at the very end where I created all of those dots. And I still wasn't satisfied. I did not like the way the bee's face looked being solid black. So I decided to go ahead and paint that with 2 coats of that yellow light acrylic paint. And then I felt like I just painted too much of it. So I took a Sharpie, drew an outline around the face, and then filled in on the outside of that outline with the black acrylic paint. I decided to go ahead and dry brush a little bit of that black paint around the front to give it a little bit more of an outline. I decided to paint an eye and just a little bitty mouth, and this is how it turned out. This project, you'll need 3 of Dollar Tree's wooden hearts. I'm going to use my handheld miter shears to cut the bottom part of the heart off. This tool is really handy for softwood, and I have this listed in my Amazon store. The link to that is in my description box below if you're interested. I'm going to put some painter's tape down, sticky side up, and tape that to my mat so that it will be easier for me to paint these without them moving around and getting paint all over myself. I painted them with 2 coats of a pumpkin acrylic paint. Once that dried, I'm going to use a yellow paint in the color Daybreak and a fine tip paintbrush to go around and create small lines on each of the hearts and that tiny little triangle. This is going to give it some highlight. Then we're going to use one of the wooden eggs. These you can find in Dollar Tree. I actually bought mine about 2 years ago at Family Dollar before their prices went up, so this one was $1. Once I remove the label, I'm going to set it down on some wax paper and give this 2 coats of that same yellow acrylic paint in the color Daybreak. Now I am going to paint this entire piece on both sides. Once it dries, I'm going to take that same pumpkin orange paint and gently go around the edges just to give it some added color and some dimension. This part is completely optional. I originally wanted to make some polka dots, and I used the end of a fat paintbrush and dipped it into some white paint and twirled it around. However, it created a lot of clumping in the middle because I didn't have a sponge brush small enough for the dots I wanted to make, and I wasn't satisfied with that, so I decided to sand that down and touch it up with some more yellow paint. That's what I love about painting things. If you don't like it or you make a mistake, you can just paint over it and start again. Once I allowed that yellow paint to dry, I grabbed one of the smallest sponge brushes that I had. That was still too big, so I'm going to use the flat end of that to create my dots, and I am putting very little paint on that wood piece and just pressing it down on top of the egg. I kind of went over some of the areas that I already did because I only put 1 coat of yellow paint on there so you could still see some of the previous dots. Once I've allowed that to dry, we can then attach our hearts and our little triangle to the egg. If you haven't guessed already, we are making the cutest little Easter chick. I'm going to attach those using some hot glue. And once I have those in place and I've removed all of my glue strands, I'm going to take a pencil and just draw 2 ovals for the eyes. I started off by going around the outline with a black Sharpie. Now you could fill that in with the Sharpie, but I wanted that matte look to it, so I used a black matte acrylic paint to fill those in. Once that dried, I took my Sharpie and created a couple of eyelashes on each side, and she is turning out absolutely adorable. To create the whites for the eyes, I'm going to use a small dowel that's flat on the end and do the same trick we did earlier by dipping that into just a little bit of white paint. I gave it an outline using my Sharpie and created a small simple bow using some pink ribbon with white polka dots. I'm going to hot glue that right to the top off to the side, and I absolutely love how it turned out, and I would love to know what you guys think. You could add a hanger to the back of this or even glue some of Dollar Tree's tumbling tower blocks to the back so that it could sit up. We're going to use another one of those wooden eggs. Now, the edging was pretty rough, so I did go over this one with some sandpaper, removed all the debris, and I'm going to give this 3 coats of white paint on all sides. Once dry, we're going to add a layer of Mod Podge only to the bottom half. You want to make sure you get a nice thin layer and especially get those edges. We're going to be using some scrapbook paper. This came from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to cut that down to a little bit larger than the bottom half of the egg, and I'm going to cut this using some of these scissors that create the designs at the top. The Mod Podge has dried, and now we're going to apply our scrapbook paper directly to our wood piece. I'm going to set this down on a heating mat, apply the scrapbook paper over top of our wood piece, use a piece of parchment paper, and then I'm using a mini iron set on 365. You could use a household iron. I have this listed in my Amazon store, and the link to that's in my description box below if you're interested. You do have to apply a little bit of pressure because the scrapbook paper is pretty thick, and you want to make sure you get all of those edges. Once it's cooled down, I'm going to take my finger sander and go around the edge in one direction. This is going to give us a nice crisp line. Using a pencil, I'm going to draw out the nose and the mouth and the eyes. Then I'm going to go back with a fine tip Sharpie, go over the outline of the mouth. Then I'm going to paint the nose using a Cameo Pink acrylic paint, and then use my Sharpie to fill in the eyes and give her some cute eyelashes. This is when you can get really creative with the faces you make. Using a sponge brush from Dollar Tree, I'm going to dab that into the Cameo Pink paint to create her cheeks. Once that dries, I'm going to use my pencil to draw a couple of whiskers and fill that in with the fine tip Sharpie. Now for the ears, we're going to use a jumbo craft stick, and then you'll want a craft stick that's smaller so that when you place it on top, you still have some of the edging showing all the way around. We're going to paint that large craft stick with 3 coats of white acrylic paint, and I did paint both sides because I like the back of my projects to be finished. For the smaller one, we're going to give that 2 coats of the Cameo Pink paint, and you only need to paint the top of this one. Cut each one of those in half, and then we're going to glue the pink one directly to the center at the top of each of the white ones. Now we can place this behind our wooden egg to determine where we want the ears to sit. So depending on your preference, if you want them out or longer or shorter or straight up, once you determine that, you'll want to cut one of the pieces down so they'll both sit flat on the back. And then we can attach that using some hot glue, or you could use a permanent glue like E6000. Once the hot glue has cooled off, you could add a hanger to the back or add some wooden blocks so that it could sit up. I made a simple bow using some purple ribbon to attach right at the top, and decided to add in a paper flower right in the center. Using some of Dollar Tree's wood ornaments, we're going to use the chicks and the eggs. You'll need 5 of each. I'm laying some painter's tape out with the sticky side up and then attaching it to my silicone mat so I can be able to place all of these on there and paint them without them moving around. Gave the chicks 2 coats of white chalk paint. The eggs I'm painting in a violet color. Once those dry, I will go back and fill in the feet on the chicks with my orange Sharpie, or you can use some acrylic paint. Then I'm using a white paint pen to add dots to all of the eggs. Once that thoroughly dries, you can flip them over. You're going to want to paint the back side the exact same color or whatever color of your choice. I'm going to paint 3 12-inch wood dowels white. Now you only need 2. I wasn't sure exactly how many I was going to need, so I painted 3 of those. We're using this sign from Dollar Tree. It measures 6.5 inches square on the outside edges. I'm going to remove the paper from the backing just because I don't want that lettering to come through. Then I'm using this gorgeous scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby. I'm lining it up so I can make sure my design is exactly where I want it to be on the backing, and then I can attach this using some Mod Podge. You do not have to go over the paper with Mod Podge, but I did decide to go ahead and do that just so that it would not scratch or peel off. Add this back into your frame. Then we're going to cut down our wood dowels to 5 5/8 of an inch. That is the inside measurements of the frame itself. And I'm using my handheld miter shears to do this. And I have that linked in my Amazon store, which is in my description box below if you're interested. You're able to get 2 of those out of 1 dowel, so that's why you only need 2 dowels. Sand those ends down so they're nice and straight. We're measuring 1 3/4 of an inch from each of the corners, and I'm making a tiny mark. You're going to do that on all 4 sides so that you'll know where to apply your dowels. Hot glue those down and then add the other 2 directly on top. You guessed it, we are making the cutest tic-tac-toe board. Make sure to go back and erase all of your pencil marks. And how precious is this? You could paint these in so many different colors, in so many different designs. These would make such cute gifts to put in an Easter basket for your children or grandchildren. For this project, I'm using 2 different colored Snuggadoo socks that you can find at Dollar Tree. We only need 1 of each. Set the other 2 to the side because we'll use those in the next project. I'm going to use some old rice as well as a measuring cup and a duct tape roll. Just fold your sock through the inside of the duct tape roll. Pull that to the outside. You could also use a cup for this. You're going to pour as much rice in there as you like. You just want to leave some space at the very top. We're going to take some white string and I am going to tie that around at the very top where the rice is. I'm making a pair of sock bunnies. You'll want to tie your string as tight as you can. Leave enough space at the top for your bunny ears. Double knot that. Cut the excess string off. And it's going to look something like this. Come down a little further from where you just tied your string, pinch that off to create the head and separate it from the body. You're going to take another piece of string, tie it as tight as you can to make sure it stays in place, and double knot that as well, cut your excess off. Then we're going to cut the top part of the sock, so it's going to look like this. You're going to turn it around, cut the top part of the sock in half to create 2 bunny ears. Then you can cut it at a curve, sort of like an angle to give it some shape. You can cut it as short as you want or leave them as long as you want. But once you have both sides of those shaped out, take some hot glue and glue the very 2 end pieces together. Pinch that, hold it, let that glue set up. Do that on the other side as well. And then at the very bottom of the ear, glue those 2 little pieces together on each side, but leave the middle of it open. Then you're going to take some hot glue and right below where the ears are, you're going to place some glue underneath that area and push that down to the top of the bunny's head. Once that sets up, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to take some pink decorative Easter trim that you can find at Dollar Tree and just tie that around between the body and the head and make a simple bow. Trim that down, and using an oil-based Sharpie marker, I'm going to create some eyes, a mouth, and for the nose, I have a pink marker to create just a little dot for the nose. To top it off, I'm going to take some paper flowers, and you can find these at Hobby Lobby, and sometimes Dollar Tree has some really pretty flowers. And I'm going to hot glue that right there at the bottom of the two ears. So it's going to look something like this. Then I'm going to take the pink sock and do the exact same thing once I have it filled with the rice and I tie the two sections off. I'm going to do the ears a little bit different on this one. Once I cut that in half and then I shape it by curving it from one end to the other, I'm going to glue the top piece as well as the bottom piece, still leaving that middle open, but when I glue that bottom piece, I'm going to twist it so the middle piece is now facing outward. And I'll do that on the opposite ear as well. Once you have those two glued and twisted, take your glue and apply it right between where the ears and the head is. Push that down, hold it, let that glue set up, and then the opening for the two ears will be on the outside. I'm going to use some white decorative trim for this to create a simple bow. Draw a face with the oil-based Sharpie and the pink Sharpie marker. And for this one, I'm going to add a cute white paper rose right in the center. For this project, you could use fabric. You could use some of Dollar Tree's Chanel yarn. They have a multitude of colors. However, their Chanel yarn tends to be a little thin, so I'm going to be using some chunky yarn from Hobby Lobby. I have some ivory color here. It is super thick, super soft. That's what I was going for. And I'm also going to be using a color called Sea Glass. On one of the Valentine's Day aisles at Dollar Tree, I found these chunky wood pieces. I'm going to use one egg and one bunny. We're going to start off with the egg. I'm going to remove the label from the back. And I'm going to use the Sea Glass yarn for this one. Starting on the back side, I'm going to glue that yarn down at the bottom. Try not to interfere with the bottom of the egg so that it will still be able to stand up. I'm going to hot glue this all the way around the sides, the front, and the other side to make sure that my yarn stays in place. When I get to the back side where I started from, I'm going to glue that all the way up to the edge and then a little bit above it so I can start the second row. So it's going to look something like this. Then I'm going to continue to glue this around until I've made about 3 rounds all the way around using the glue. Then I can just wrap it around the middle section of the egg and glue it down periodically. Now once you get to the top, you will have to use your hot glue all the way around it just like you did at the bottom to make sure everything stays in place. Then when you get to the very top, you'll go ahead and continue wrapping it until you get to the very tip top of the egg, and just add your glue. Continue wrapping your yarn around, gluing it down, making sure everything kind of stays straight all the way across. Then you can cut your excess yarn off and tuck that in. So it's going to look like this. I am going to decorate it, but I'm going to set it to the side for right now because I want to use one of those wooden bunnies. Once I remove the label, I'm going to use the ivory yarn for this one, starting on the back. The bunny's going to be a little bit trickier because it has a lot more cuts and designs in it, so you will need to glue every single piece of yarn down. Trying to keep the yarn going in a straight line all the way across. You can do that until you get right to the front paws. Then you may have to place some glue and loop it and go back in the opposite direction. Glue the front of that and then get to the back side where you can glue it and loop it to go back around towards the front. I hope that makes sense. Then you'll have a straight line in the front and you'll be able to glue it straight across. Then you can continue that straight line until you have it all the way to the top part of the head. Once you get there, you will have to loop it back around to get the top part of the head and just glue that down to the tip of the nose. Repeat that by gluing it back up towards the ears again until you fill in that gap. I can make one more row on the way down, gluing and filling in that gap, and then I'm going to cut the yarn right at the very tip of the nose. And this worked out great because then I can fluff it out and then it has a little fluffy nose at the end. I can then go back to where I left off and glue my end of my yarn down and glue that around the ears until I get right there where the two pieces separate. Then you'll want to take a piece of your yarn and go in the center. So you'll want to glue that down. And then I just took my scissors and pressed that down to make sure it really went down in there. And then I'm going to wrap one side of the ear at one time. So you're just going to place a little bit of glue, glue a piece of yarn down, add a little more glue, push your yarn down, and continue wrapping that one ear until you have it completely filled in. Then I'll cut the yarn off, push that end piece down, and do the exact same thing on the other ear. I also tried to make sure that each of the lines for each of the ears kind of stayed almost the exact same, so they would look the same on each side. And once you're finished, it should look something like this. Now it's time to decorate them. I found a neutral colored sewing ribbon in my craft room. Now you could use wired ribbon for this if you like. I'm going to place it right in the center. Once I cut it down to size, I'm going to hot glue the ribbon to the back side of the egg, and then I'll pull it kind of tight and glue the other side down. I also have some beautiful paper flowers that you can find at Hobby Lobby or any of your craft stores. I thought this would be perfect to hot glue one right in the center of the ribbon. For the bunny, I took that same sewing ribbon and I just simply tied it around the neck and made a simple bow in the front and went ahead and dovetailed each of the ends of the bow. Then I'm going to take one of those small paper flowers and hot glue that right at the bottom, and I absolutely love how these two turned out. For this project, I have printed out an outline of a bunny on 2 pieces of copy paper. This I have as a free printable on my website. I'll have the link to my website in my description box below, and I'll also pin it in the top comment. You can go over to my website, click on free printables, and you can download these as a PDF, print them out at home, and then you can use this same template to recreate this project. I only cut the outline of the bunny, not the tail. We don't need that part. I have this cloth placemat that I found at Dollar General maybe a year or two ago, and I've had it in my craft room. I did not have two of them, so I'm going to have to use either this black or white fabric from Dollar Tree, and at the time I wasn't sure which one I wanted to use. I'm going to have to use one of those as a backing since I only have one placemat. I'm going to place this on top of my heating mat and go over it with the iron to try to remove as many wrinkles as possible. And I did decide to go ahead and make the backing with the white fabric, so I ironed it as well. Then I removed my heating mat, so now I have this just on my silicone mat. I've placed down the white fabric. I'm going to place that cloth placemat on top of the white fabric. So if you have a design, you'll want the designs on the outside. So your bottom piece, the design will be on the table. Your top piece, the design will be facing you. Then we're going to take our template, and I'm rolling up pieces of painter's tape anywhere that I think that the paper might come up, and I've placed this on the back side of the template. I decided to put mine where the lines would go horizontally, and I'm going to press that firmly onto the placemat. Now another option is, if you didn't want to use the tape, you could use some straight pins to pin the two pieces of fabric together to be able to cut this out, but I just opted to go with the painter's tape. But because my bottom piece of fabric is a little bit thinner, once I cut some of the excess fabric away, I did decide to go ahead and remove the white fabric, and I'm going to cut these out separately. So I'm just going to cut that placemat out first, and then I can remove my template, set my placemat fabric to the side, place my template back onto the white fabric and cut it out. Now I did cut the white fabric a little bit larger than the template just to make sure I had enough fabric. And don't worry, we're not going to do any sewing. I can only sew a straight line, so we're not going to be doing any type of sewing in this video. Now that both pieces of fabric have been cut, I'm going to lay them on top of each other, especially since I cut the white one a little bit larger. That way, once I line them up, I can hold them together, and any of the white part I can trim off and they'll be exactly the same size. And then I flipped both of the pieces over. It's not necessary. You can glue it either way you want to. I just flipped mine over, made sure everything was nice and flat and even, and I'm going to use some fabric hot glue. And I'm going just along the very edge of that placemat. You'll want to do small sections at a time, and then press your backing fabric down, press all the way around where you just put that glue, and let it set before you go to the next section. So with this bunny, I would just do right around the curves and then press that down, then move to the next section and continue to do that until I got to the other side of the bunny's face. So once you get right below the other side of the face, you'll want to stop. You see we have that big gap there at the bottom. You don't want to glue anymore yet because we need to place some stuffing in the ears before we continue gluing the two pieces together. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get that stuffing all the way to the tip of the ears. I used a wooden dowel to help push that polyfill all the way through, and then kind of manipulate it with your fingers to try to get it to that tip on the other side. And then I'm going to fill both of the ears and then all the way down to where I stopped with the fabric glue. I'm going to do another small section on that side as well as the bottom of the opposite foot. You don't want to close everything up because you want to be able to get all of the stuffing in there as much as you can before you close that final piece up. So once that glue sets, I'm going to stuff that foot all the way to the tip, and then also place some stuffing in there through the side to kind of fill everything out. Then I can take some more of the fabric glue and kind of close up the opposite foot. And once I have that closed up, you'll leave a little bit of an opening at the bottom, so you'll be able to place the stuffing in that foot, and you can get everything nice and full. You can take that final little piece at the very bottom, and you can place your glue right along the very edge of the placemat and then push those two pieces together and let that glue cool down. Then I looked over it, and if I saw any of the white fabric sticking through from the back, I just trimmed that off, but made sure that I stayed on the outside of my fabric glue because you don't want to kind of break that up and then it come apart. And then using some burlap trim ribbon from Dollar Tree, I'm just going to tie a very simple bow around the neck off to the side and trim that down. But before I show you the final reveal, I wanted to make something really cute to go along with this bunny. So I created another template, this time in the shape of a carrot. This too is also a free printable on my website. Again, the link to that's in my description box below. And I found the most beautiful fabric at Dollar Tree to create this carrot with. And just like with the other fabric, I'm going to place this on my heating mat and use my mini iron to get all those wrinkles out. This mini iron comes in so handy in my craft room, and if you're interested in one of those, I do have this listed in my Amazon store. The link to that's in my description box below. I'm going to fold the fabric in half, making sure that the backing's in the middle, the designs are on the outside. Then I'm going to take that carrot template, flip it over, and roll pieces of painter's tape up to place on the back, just like we did with the bunny. Press that down, and I can actually cut both pieces of fabric this time at the same time because this fabric is pretty thin. It's not as thick as that placemat was. Once I remove the template, again, I'm going to make sure that the fabric pieces are flat. Then I can use that fabric glue to go right along the very edge and seal these two pieces together. I'll be able to glue this almost 3/4 of the way before I start placing the stuffing. I want to be able to make sure I get it all the way to the end, and because this doesn't have all those intricate designs like the bunny did, you'll be able to glue those two pieces together majority of the way, just leaving an opening at the top. And because the way I designed the template at the top, you'll be able to glue that one section, fill that up, and then on the other side you'll be able to glue that same section and fill that side up, but still leave that little opening at the very top where those two pieces are. We're not going to glue that together, so it's going to look something like this. I have 2 stems of greenery that came off of a bundle from Hobby Lobby, but Dollar Tree has some really pretty greenery too you could use for this. I'm going to take a piece of twine and double knot them where the 2 stems overlap at the bottom. Then I'll take some of that twine and twist it around to make a nice thick base where the stems are, and then I can hot glue that, cut the excess twine off, and then we can use the base with the wrapped twine to put in the top of our carrot. Now once you put it in there, you're going to want to take some stuffing and fill that in the front and the back to make sure it's nice and full around where that greenery is. And then I just use that wooden dowel to help me put the stuffing in there. Using the fabric glue, I can glue those 2 pieces of fabric together as well as to the greenery stems. And once that cools down, I'm going to take a piece of twine and just tie a very simple bow right around the top. This is also going to help hold that greenery in place. Then I can trim the excess twine off, and this cute little carrot is finished, and I think it's so pretty along with the bunny. I hope you enjoyed today's video and found tons of inspiration. If you have a favorite, let me know in the comments section down below because I always love to know which one is your favorite. If you haven't subscribed already, I would love for you to click that subscribe button right below the video. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Please take care, and I'll see you guys next time.